And next up, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to learn about project financing for energy performance contracting by none other than the Chief Operating Officer for Malaysia Debt Ventures himself. Please put your hands together and let's welcome Encik Nizam Mohamed Nazri.
Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. That was actually our launch video that was issued in 2014. So you're going to see some changes in the numbers that I'm going to present today. Essentially what MDV, we are a Ministry of Finance company. Probably we are not as widely known, essentially because we finance critical or specific technology areas. Back to the event at hand. Thank you again, Mr. Wong Miroslav, for all the pressure placed on me and my team in trying to manage the fund. The 200 million that they mentioned is essentially the fund that we raised with the help of the government. Essentially MDV being an MOF incorporated company, a subsidiary of MKD. How we obtain our funds is through an issuance of a sukuk to the market, fully guaranteed by the government, to ensure that our borrowing costs are low and we pass on these costs to the government. Before I start, again, I would like to thank for all the hard work actually BSEEP, JKR, KETA has done. Selling money, ladies and gentlemen, is actually the easy part. Repayment can be a bit of an issue. Okay, as you've seen, that was circa 2014. We've had about 8.8 billion since then. In total, since 2002, we have financed about 10.6 billion worth of energy projects. This goes to more than 760 companies, 760 projects, over 500 technology companies since our commencement. Like I've stated earlier, again, we started essentially, it's a learning process also for MDV. We started with ICT. We progressed on, I'm sorry. We progressed on to biotechnology, green technology, but always with the support of all our partners in the agencies. For example, when we went into financing the renewable energy power purchase agreement, we had close cooperation between the Ministry, Sustainable Energy Development Authority, again, working with them to understand better. So that essentially is how we work. MDV is a project financier, meaning we look at we try to ring fence whatever proceeds, rights within a particular entity. Think of it like a large highway projects, but we sort of microsize it for IT, biotech, or green technology projects. So going forward, what the 2014 event that did expanded our scope to look at these technologies as a platform for companies to deliver their innovative or advanced products and services. Before I shift, essentially what I intend to also highlight is that the MDV's focus areas technology moves in tandem with the government's focus areas. Currently, now we have green technology and EPC, and we have allocated the necessary amount of funds to make this a success. Our portfolio also reflects this progression. We started off with 100% of our portfolio, loan portfolio in ICT. Currently, our portfolio stands at about 1.5 billion. This is 40% is IT, 40% is in green technology, and 20% in emerging technology and biotechnology. So again, we have been supporting both companies and hopefully the ESCOs going forward to deliver their projects and to meet the government goals. Similarly, in terms of the products or programs that we offer have evolved. We started off with just simple term loan lines. You want to buy servers, for example. Again, it's more like a leasing company. You need working capital for your software, your systems integration operations. For example, you provide working capital. But we meet companies often, and we understand the requirements further, and we keep on adding. I think the latest one, which I will add on to, is the energy performance contracting. But in this particular part, like what Miroslav mentioned, this is meant to be a pilot project of sorts. I'm not sure whether we know any better, but we are generally tasked to lead into areas where commercial banks do not want to enter. For reasons, essentially for regulations, they are the guardians of public monies, your deposits, my deposits. They have their own reporting requirements, they have their own stakeholders. But for certain key technology, strategic areas, again, so the government, I think, does need to have a strong intervention to develop the particular sector. In one particular aspect, I would like to point out the first box, the first orange box, Green Technology Financing Scheme. I think when we were invited to participate, it was primarily all banks. For MDV, we were specifically excluded from the banking regulations to accord us this certain flexibility to go into areas that perhaps that are of higher risk. For Green Technology Financing Scheme, I think when we went in, I think the total amount guaranteed under the program out of 3.5 billion, only about a few hundred million, I think was taken up. So then we were asked by MOF, after persuading Bank Negara and CGC to include us in. Alhamdulillah, now I think it's almost fully taken up. I think at last count, it was about 3 billion out of the 3.5 billion. And for MDV, out of 10 or so active banks, we were actually number one on, we were number one in terms of the league tables. Not because of the other banks are not reluctant, they are moving along, but again, this is to play our role to show that the other banks that, these technology sectors are actually viable. The people behind these companies are actually credible. And the other program that we launched ahead of all the other banks is our intellectual property financing scheme. So essentially what the Ministry of Finance envisages is that, you are a technology company, you are an innovative company, but you have your intellectual property. You either have these patents or you have your copyrights. You pledge these to this financial institution as collateral, and we lend against that. For example, you have your version 1 ready, pledge that IP to the FI, then you would get funds to develop your version 2, version 3 onwards. So again, these are the two pioneering programs that we are currently implementing. Now back to the current one, energy performance contracting. Essentially, the flows would involve the building owner, the ESCOs, but I think the two key parts that we like to highlight. I think we've highlighted earlier, why MDV in terms of our track record. Now, I'd like to outline the house rather. In terms, the ESCOs, for example, that are in this room today, I think I would like to highlight. I mean, as a financier, although we tend to look at things, the glass rather, as half empty, but in terms of MDV, I think we are optimistic in terms of the capabilities that the promoters bring to the table. But the key things I would like to highlight is in terms of, from the financier perspective, if you're looking to get such projects. The four key areas that we like to look at in terms of the building owner, the contract, the loan, of course, with us, and the payments to MDV. In terms of the building owner, inevitably we would look at them as the ultimate payor. So these parties need to be credible, need to be strong. Secondly, in terms of the contract, although this is actually a new program, we have actually financed 3 large contracts, one for a major commercial bank, for a major utility, and for a public university. So these range between 20 to 40 million, actually, these projects. But what we have found since implementing, working together with the ESCOs is that there are a few things that you need to look at if you're going to structure your loan agreements with the ESCOs. One is that the approval or the sign-off for payments, where possible, you should try to have at least a single party. With our experience with the bank, going through a few hundred branch managers is not particularly easy. That would delay the payments coming into yourself. So please bear this in mind. And secondly, I think what we would look at is, other than the investment grade audit or preliminary and the final audit that Miroslav outlined, is that there should be at least a minimum of floor that we can count on. Of course, should the savings exceed, and there will be some additional profit sharing, but it is quite crucial that the financiers will be able to determine that a floor exists to be able to sufficiently repay and keep your account on time and current. On the second part, on the loans on the loan itself with the financial institution, be it with MDV or other banks, essentially, like I mentioned, we would be looking essentially at the capabilities of the people behind that. Track record for us, company is an artificial institution. We will be looking at the technical people, the management team, in terms of their experience, their qualifications, their capabilities. But two things to bear in mind when we look is in terms of the margin of financing. Again, depending, we will be financing, as I'll explain later, up to 85% of the project value. But this would vary, again, depending on the other credit issues that I mentioned earlier. And the other part is that what we would also expect is for the ESCOs to put in your own capital. We cannot finance 100% of the entire project. So again, this would be the flow. Once you have secured the contract, then you can present the contract to MDV. We would review the contract and structure the loan account to you. When the payments would come in, we would establish an escrow account or a project account that the payments will remit via MDV, and we would again refund the balance to you. So essentially, this would be the model that we will look at. In terms of the structure of the loan, when you are dealing with, be it MDV or other financial institutions, there are 4 key components that you will need to look into. One is in terms of the condition precedents. These are the documents, information, or undertakings required for you to be able to obtain a release letter to activate the account. That's one. Secondly, in terms of if you're dealing with the banks, there would be disbursement conditions. So these would be some additional documents that you need to submit. For example, invoices from your suppliers. If the financing is also for salaries of your staff, there will be details on the staff, your human resource requirements, their level of payments, the level of deductions required. The other part is in terms of the repayment terms. So these are actually, it could either be on a percentage, for example, of the proceeds coming in, which would generally match the margin of financing, or a table of payments. The final part is what you need to look into in a letter offer from the bank is the covenant. Covenants outline what you need to do once the money goes out. For example, this would be the generic ones. For example, if you are to obtain loans from other financiers, do obtain the first financier's consent, change of shareholders, change of directors, manage a requirement to furnish your audited accounts. So these 4 areas are something that you should look at when considering a financing package. I think then the other part that Miroslav and I think Mr. Wong touched on, the incentives, I think which was touched on earlier. When I mentioned that MDV has financed 3 projects earlier, 3 energy performance contracting projects. So these are with larger companies, again, that has the ability to stand on its own, albeit slightly weaker than what banks would require. To facilitate, for us to come in, what in essence, I think what the agencies involved was trying to achieve is to have a mirror green GTFS scheme, where there would be a guarantee of sorts. And secondly, in terms of an interest subsidy. The guarantee, for example, that would reduce some of the collateral requirements that may be imposed. For example, if it's a new company, for example, where the people has perhaps a relevant track record, but not necessarily within energy performance contracting. Without this, the collateral requirements, for example, could be higher. This credit enhancement provided by the government via CGC will enable financiers such as MDV to look at minimal collateral requirement, for example, that would definitely lower and ease your cash flow. For example, the things that you could ask would include, cash deposits would be significantly reduced, a sinking fund requirement would be significantly reduced. The other part is in terms of the interest subsidy. Our rates generally range between 7.5 to 8.5, depending again on the overall risk profile. We will look at in terms, as I touched on a bit earlier, we will look at the management team, the counterparty, who is the ultimate payer, the tenure of the loan, the contract structure. So this again would come up with an ultimate credit score, so to speak, and would determine the pricing. So the range of between 7.5 to 8.5. Any cash flow requirement, your cash flow requirements are further eased with this subsidy provided by the government. On our part, we will provide 200 million from our, we have allocated 200 million of our funds for this particular project. But again, I would like to also add that notwithstanding that, that this project, although there is a cap to ensure that it is accessible to as many companies as possible, we do have our other funds. So if there are larger projects that perhaps that you have, you manage to secure, we can still consider, but it's part of, and it will be part of our normal financing scheme. How the other parties come in, as I mentioned, the building owner, you will need to secure that with the building, the contract, energy performance contract with the building owner. With CGC, for example, and KETA, they will be providing the subsidies or fees to cover the CGC fees, which would range about from 0.5% of the facility fees. And from the 1% subsidy, that will come where we will do rate reprofiling, where you will be accorded a lower rate but on a rebate basis. So with the monies coming in from KETA and from BSEEP, then we will again either for the interest rate subsidy, we will refund back to the company on a periodic basis, and from the fees received to the CGC, we will remit directly to CGC on your behalf. In essence, what I would like to, before I end, we have the three key main areas, the three parameters I would like to highlight. In terms of the product features, it can be either a term, revolving, or trade facility. Trade facility essentially refers to letters of credit that you may require to procure or purchase some of the equipments from overseas. We can also have a sublimit also for bank guarantees or performance guarantees if the building owner requires. So the financing provided, the financing approved, will be for you to purchase project inputs, I think as Miroslav mentioned, for both the active and passive elements of your contract. Financing, generally, we would structure the loan to match whatever contracts that you have, generally up to 10 years, but it should be at least be within the contract tenure. The final part of it, we can finance up to 15 million per project. So the program criteria, it's primarily it's for ESCOs to undertake the retrofitting exercise for the building owners. For single buildings, it must have an IGA by a Suruhanjaya Tenaga registered energy efficiency manager, and ESCO applicant must be registered with Suruhanjaya Tenaga. So the final part, as I mentioned, what we would be looking at is that it must be a viable project by itself and standalone. The management team must show that they are indeed capable. The minimum staff, minimum paid up capital, at least to ensure that you'll be able to tide over. Minimum credit requirements, as I mentioned, in terms of we'll be looking at the management team, the project cash flow, and there should not be any adverse credit reports on the promoters, on the directors, and on the shareholders. For example, satisfy all the credit checks, as I mentioned, in terms of CTOS and CCRIS. And as I think Miroslav mentioned, this is a project financing. meaning that the security itself is the project. So how this is actually crystallized is by having the project, the proceeds from the building owners to be assigned to MDV. So this would form essentially the primary source of collateral for us. Notwithstanding that, so how, for example, if, for example, you would be getting 100,000, the margin, we would deduct 85%, generally, depending on the margin. Then 15,000 would be refunded to you as soon as we receive the payments. So that, in essence, is how we would work. But before I close, generally, would like to point out that MDV as a whole is a project financier. That is a distinct difference actually from the normal commercial banks. Commercial banks generally, before I go into this, any bankers in the room? Okay, great. Commercial banks generally, you go to them, then generally, below certain limits, you actually have to stay on the ground floor, meet the SME people. No bankers, right? So, unless you go to them, sir, I would like to borrow 200 million. 200? Okay, go up to the first floor. That's when you meet the corporate banking people, when they have, slightly more flexibility or the more. But, if you go to the on the SME side, then generally, they would have product A, B, C, D. So they would try to best match, what products they have in hand to your requirements. So generally what I'm saying that it's going to be faster, but whether it meets your requirements or not, that's a separate matter. We've had customers who had to construct telco towers. So for the bankers who are silent and still in the room, BA facilities essentially is sort of like a bill discounting facility. It's meant for short-term financing. You can't use that facility to build towers which will be paid off over 7 years. It's not going to be possible. So one of our customers had this. So what we do essentially is, this is also actually an appeal for to give us a bit of chance when we review your projects. What we try to do is we try to understand each contract that you submit, in all likelihood, will be different. So what we try to do is we try to match whatever your requirements. For example, the payment terms that are coming in, your contract tenure, what are the conditions. We try to match our loan facility to your requirements. So essentially, there would be no issues of non-performance. Everything is, I would say, perfectly matched. There's going to be some hiccups in terms of, but we can, if there are major problems, generally we can reschedule or restructure, of course within reason. But we will actually the package that we provide will be customized. But I do appeal that the information provided to us should be complete, so as to enable us to have a proper understanding and to accord us appropriate time. Generally, in my service level agreements, the agreement that I have with my business team is that they will have to process everything within 12 days. So do give us a bit of time. It won't be as fast as the commercial banks, but we do have a turnaround time. We will try to keep to that timing, and and also we are quite mindful of the pressures that you have from the building owners or from your contract requirements itself. So essentially, for MDV, we will again try to do our best to fulfill the pressures and responsibilities placed upon us by Mr. Wong and Miroslav, and also Marina. And before I close, I would like to say that I have 4 of my team members outside in the booth. I'm going to be around. Please ask us all the necessary questions. We are here to help you. Again, we do hope that this program will be another successful program for NDV and for the government. Again, with this, I thank you.